What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Denver Beer and Oil. Today we're going to be doing another cool DIY video that we've had some requests for. If you guys know me in person, you know that E30s are my specialty. And one of the things that I've done a million times is 5-speed swaps. I get a lot of people asking me how to do it. So today I'm going to show all you folks on the internet how to 5-speed swap your E30. It's pretty straightforward. I'll show you all the wiring. I'll show you every bolt you got to pull, every tool you got to use, and you should be able to, by the end of this video, pretty easily 5-speed swap your E30 from an automatic. So let's get to work. Parts list for this are as follows. Things you're gonna need from a donor car, because I doubt anybody watching this video is gonna want to do it with new parts, but the parts you're gonna need are all from the same car. You can use, if it's an early model, you need an early model manual transmission, okay? The reason for this is because it has the pickups for the crank sensors. These right here are what hold the crank sensors on the early models. You cannot use a late model transmission on an early model car. So that is cars that are Motronic 1.1 and older. 1.3 uses a crank pickup on the front of the engine, so that's irrelevant. So you can use an old transmission on a late model car, but not a late model transmission on an early model car. You can also use the 4-cylinder transmission, driveshaft, and clutch if you like. I wouldn't recommend doing that on a 6-cylinder car unless you're not running very much power, because the clutch diameter of the disc is much smaller, so don't do that. But all you're gonna need from your donor car is your transmission, which should come with your clutch fork, throwout bearing, pilot bearing, pressure plate, clutch disc, flywheel. You're also gonna need your slave cylinder, the lines running to the slave cylinder from the master. You're gonna need your clutch pedals, the fill line running from your brake fluid reservoir to your clutch pedal master cylinder. You're also going to need the drive shaft matching the car, whichever your donor car is. If you're buying parts separately, make 100% sure that you're getting all the parts from the same car. Early model transmissions have bigger flanges, so you cannot use an early model transmission with a late model drive shaft. Remember that. Today we're going to be using late model stuff. This is also the drive shaft you need to use if you're doing a 24 valve swap with a ZF 5-speed transmission. So that information's all over the place. But to wrap it up, to conclude, the parts you're going to need are drive shaft, flex disc, transmission, clutch fork, throwout bearing, pilot bearing, flywheel, clutch disc, pressure plate, slave cylinder, lines to slave cylinder, master cylinder, clutch pedals, fill line to brake reservoir, and then your shift boot, shift knob, shift carrier, and then your, what I like to call the butthole, which is this piece right here. This is the butthole, or at least as I like to call it. If you guys need more specific information, feel free to email me at milehigheuros@gmail.com. I can help you out as long as it's not blowing up like crazy. But you're going to need to take this bracket off the donor car. They also sell them on ECS new with fresh bushings. And while you're at it, you may as well do a bushing rebuild, because these things are almost always blown. So things to rebuild: circular bushing right here, cup bushing right here. You've got your soft rubber bushing in the butthole right there. And then going to the transmission, this piece right here needs to be replaced. This is your shift selector rod, and as you can see, this one has a bunch of play in it. So over the years, they kind of waller themselves out. So replace that while you've got your trans out. Other maintenance items are going to be trans mounts right here. They should come with your donor car if they're good. I guess you can reuse them. I'm going to reuse them because this is kind of a budget swap, but they're pretty cheap on ECS Tuning or Amazon or wherever you choose to get them. Let's see, I think that is all for the shifter. Also, your actual shifter right here, this is a bushing. This centerpiece, that centerpiece right there is a bushing. So if you're not doing a super budget swap, or if you want a short shifter or anything other than sloppy stock, buy a new one of these. You can drill them out and make your own bushing if you're creative and crafty, but it's easier just to buy one. They sell them for $6 on eBay. So cheap and easy. Lastly, for parts, you're going to need your seal. This goes between the body to keep all the hot air and road grime from getting in the cab. and then your reverse sensor harness. You can actually build this. It's just a 2-prong connector, so you can use barrel connectors if you want to be cheap and ghetto, and then the other side is just spade connectors. So pretty easy. It's about 18 inches of wire. You can make that. That's just for your reverse lights, but we'll get into that later. So that's all the parts you need. I'm gonna get back to work. Okay, step number 1. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is take the exhaust off. I'm not gonna show you step by step because it's pretty easy, but all you need to know is you're gonna need a 14mm socket for the exhaust bolts that are right up here. So there's 6 of them, 3 on each flange. It's maybe tough to see, get my hand out of there. But there are 6 bolts, 14mm. You're gonna remove all those. Usually there's a bracket right here attaching the transmission to the exhaust as another support. This car doesn't have it. It's a 13 though, so it's 1 bolt. Remove it, 13mm, done. Coming back here, next thing you want to do is remove this bolt right here. On this one it's pretty rusty. Luckily the hanger's broken, so it's not doing anything. Remove that. That takes care of that. It's a 13 as well. These 2 are also 13s. So you're going to want to remove this nut, and then your entire exhaust, with the help of somebody else, should be able to come down and backwards and be removed. It may take some wiggling, jiggling, and prying with a pry bar, but it should come right out. So I'm going to do that, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, exhaust is off. Next step, taking off all this nonsense under the car so you can get to all the transmission stuff. First thing you're going to do, take off this cross brace right here. 13mm, every single one of them. So zap those out. 2 more 13s here, 4 more 13mm here, and then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 10mm right there. I highly recommend getting an impact for this job. It's going to make your life a lot easier. If you're doing this under the car, it would be in your best interest to wear some eye protection. I should be too, because on these old cars, there's all kinds of junk up there. You don't know what's sitting up there. So put some eye protection on, and if you're using loud stuff, hearing protection. That's been your PSA for the day. Anyway, after we take all this stuff off, we're gonna get to the rest of the transmission stuff, and I'll show you that here in a second. So here we go. Okay, so now that all that junk is off, the next step in the equation to this automatic transmission removal is taking the drive shaft off. So we're looking at, I believe, 18mm bolts right here for the guibo. You're gonna need a spanner for the other side, or for us Yankees, a open end box wrench in the flavor of 18mm. Next thing you're gonna need is a 13mm socket to remove the center support bearing, which also, if yours looks like this on your donor car, you should order a center support bearing, because that is very destroyed. So remove those 2. And then finally, 4 17mm on the back. Sometimes they're 16, sometimes they're 17. Depends on what car you have. It could be either. So I believe the 4 cylinders and the eyes had 16s. But anyway, so you want to start with the back ones. Then you want to get the ones on the flex disc. And then the last ones you're going to remove are these 2. And that'll allow you to kind of catch the drive shaft as it comes out. You may have to fight with it a little bit on the transmission side, and you may have to bonk it a couple times on the differential side, but it should come out fairly easily. And then once that's done, the next thing we're gonna do is remove these 4 bolts on the transmission mount, which, by the way, I forgot to mention that you're gonna need a 5-speed transmission mount rather than an automatic. They are not the same. Regardless, you're gonna remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts right there. That'll get your mount out of the way, and it also droops the transmission down so you have a lot better access to everything else you need to remove. So I'm gonna start with the drive shaft, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the rest of that. Okay, so drive shaft is off, and a correction. Those bolts on the drive shaft flex disc, or driveline flex disc, or guibo as it's known, they're actually 17s, and this is a 325i automatic. So if you have one of those, you need a 17mm, not an 18. My bad. Just a quick little visual so you guys can see what I was talking about. This is the automatic drive shaft from the 325i versus the manual drive shaft from the 325e. Now if you look at the end of it, it may be hard to tell without the flex disc on here, but the flex disc on the I is actually significantly smaller than the one on the E, which is large. This is actually the same size as the E36 M3, which is why this drive shaft is the one that you use to swap. So that's pretty cool. If the owner of this car ever decides to go to a 24 valve with a ZF transmission, he already has a drive shaft. Pretty cool. The other thing worth noting is the lengths on the drive shaft. The shorter one is the automatic, as I've said, and the longer one is the manual transmission. The automatic transmission is longer. If you guys are unable to source a parts car, or there's got something, or the driveline's damaged or something like that, you can actually mix and match the front sections. The rear sections are the same. So if you can only find a front section, that's okay. The splines are the same, they go right on. Highly recommend replacing your center support bearing while you're at it. And then really for good measure, you need to have it balanced. The drive shaft came out of a running and driving car, the one that I'm using, so we're not gonna do that. However, if you are doing this swap and you're mixing and matching shafts, always get it rebalanced. And I mean, you're in there, so you might as well replace the flex disc and your center support bearing. So that's it for drive lines. Next thing we're gonna do is drooping the transmission. So I'm gonna do that. It's just these 5 bolts, like I said earlier. Once I get it drooped, I'm gonna point out all of the bolts and lines that we need to remove in order to get this automatic transmission out of the car. Okay, so I've got the transmission cross member pulled. As you can see, it's hanging down a significant bit lower than it was before. And the next thing that I went ahead and did, because you should do it no matter what, is pull your drain plug and drain the transmission. So while that's draining, I'm going to walk you through a couple other things. The first thing is where to disconnect the linkage. On every automatic transmission, you've got a linkage connected. This is your linkage right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop this clip off right here by lifting up and sliding the whole clip upwards. Oh, got stuck. Let me go out there. So once that clip is off, we're going to move to the front of the transmission, and we're going to remove all of the lines. This is your dipstick tube right here. It goes all the way up, and that's how you check your level. It does make it a lot easier if you pull that. Obviously, make sure you drain the transmission beforehand. The next thing you're going to want to do is pull off this line right here and this line right here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 lines, your linkage, your cross member, and then you're ready to start pulling bolts from the bell housing to remove the transmission. So I'm going to start banging that out, and then when we're ready to pull those bolts out, I will show you where they are, how many they are, and what size tools you need for it. Okay, so unfortunately I didn't take the time to figure out exactly what size that was. All I did was use a big adjustable crescent wrench. Where's my BFW? This bad baby right here is like $29.99 at Harbor Freight if you're watching this and you're in the US. If you're in the UK, sorry, I don't know what you guys have, but this will save your life. Made cracking this nut loose right here really easy. And if you're not going back to an automatic transmission and have no desire to do so, which I don't know why you would ever want to do that, you don't really need to worry about taking those other lines off the proper way. You can use one of these, and it works really well, and it's really quick, and it's really easy. So all I did after I drained the oil was cut these suckers right here, right where the bell housing is, so it makes removal nice and easy. And then you just have to go back through and remove them from the car. So now that these are out, we can start with the removal of the transmission. So tools you're going to need are going to be an E10, an E12, and an E14, I believe. For certain, an E10 and an E14, but I will clarify that here in a second. So the E10 is the small guy, so that's external torques 10. And then you've got the big guys. I believe these are E14s, external torques 14. And then a lot of people forget this. There's actually a 10 millimeter bolt up here, right where my finger is, that goes from the flex plate or the dust cover right here into the bell housing. So you need to remove that as well. And that is a 10 millimeter. Very easy. I just use a spanner. For ease of explanation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the transmission, and then I'm going to put all the bolts right back where they were so you guys can see exactly where they're at. Now the best way to do this that I found, because I've done it tons of times, is to use either a socket wrench with a lot of extensions or an impact with a lot of extensions. Do yourself a favor and go to your tool vendor of choice and get yourself one of these little suckers. This is a CV style universal joint. These will save your life getting transmissions out. It makes your life much easier. So go get some. The ones on the bottom, you can actually just use a straight extension right off of your socket wrench. But the ones at the top, the E12s, I believe, at the very top, there's 2 of them. This makes them a lot easier. It also makes the ones on the side a lot easier. And it also makes the removal of the starter bolts a lot easier, which I will get to. So do yourself a favor, grab one of these. I'm gonna remove all these bolts, and then I'm gonna show you guys exactly where they all are and what tools you're gonna need. So dudes, so transmission's off, as you can see. So now you get to see all of the bolts and where they're at. So starting with our mascot here, this is Falco the polar bear. He's the Denver Beer and Oil mascot. What's up, buddy? So here we go. These are the top 2 bolts. These go into the very top of the engine, I believe into the head. These are E14s, external torques, E14. Got 2 of these, 1, 2. Moving counterclockwise. Then, if your car is stock, are gonna have 2 E12s, and these are only the starter ones, so you only need the E12 for your starter bolts. And quite frankly, I've worked on a lot of these cars, and these are almost never stock, because back in the 90s, anytime somebody was ripping a starter off, they didn't know what the hell these were probably, and stripped them and then replaced them with something else. But regardless, if your car is stock, these are going to be E12 Torx bolts. If it is not, they're probably going to be 17 millimeter, just regular hex heads. So 2 of those, boom boom. So what you can do to get this bolt out, if you're by yourself and you're working on your car, it has a nut on the other side. This nut is extremely hard to access. I mean, like, really hard to get to. So what you can do to get it off, if you're working by yourself, is you get a pry bar. Then when your pry bar magically appears in your hands, what you do is you come in through the top next to the manifold behind everything, and you set your pry bar like this. So just the tip of it is sitting on one of these hex heads, and this is just kind of a trick that I've, established myself over the years. And then you can hit the bolt from the back with an impact, and it'll spin it right off, and the nut will stay in place, and your bolt will come out. That's how I just did it. That's how I found it's the easiest way to do it with only one person if you don't have anyone helping you. Okay, going further clockwise. Your second starter bolt, again, this one is an E12. You can get to it. The nut is easy to access with your hand. So once you get it loose, you can just kind of put your thumb on it and take it out from the back with either an impact or a wrench. And then these guys right here, the big ones, E14s. You've got 2 long ones. One right here and one right here. They're on either side. Okay, those are the E14s. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 E14s. And then continuing further counterclockwise, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 E10s. These are the little guys right here. So you have 4 of those. Remove them. They're kind of tricky to see on the, especially this one. If you don't look for it, you might miss it. So make sure you get that one out. Continuing further clockwise is the other E14 that I told you about. You already know that. Lastly, the one that everybody forgets is this little guy right here. This is a 10 millimeter. It's connected, or it goes through your flex plate or dust cover into your transmission. And a lot of people miss that because it's always covered in grease and grime and it's hard to see. But if you don't take it off, you're gonna bend the crap out of your flex plate / dust cover. So make sure you get that bolt out. And then from here, what we're gonna do, okay, well this one doesn't have a plug. A lot of times on E30s, there's a plug right here. This one doesn't have it, so I'm just gonna show you through the side. You're gonna have to remove your torque converter with these 18 millimeters that are right here. So there's 3 of them. What I do is on cars that don't have the plug, this lower pan right here is removable. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 13 millimeter bolts. And this one, if you have a convertible or if your car still has this bracket, this thrust bracket right here, it's kind of a pain in the butt to get out. What you can do is loosen your sway bar or remove it to give you access to the bolts. And again, there's 2. 1, 2, there. That removes the bracket and gets the bolts out of this lower cover. And then 2 more 13s on the other side. And this whole lower cover here, if you'll look, if you see the black area, this is the whole lower cover. And then it just basically provides a place for the transmission to bolt to, but it's removable. So you take that off, and then you'll see you can have access to the bolts on your torque converter right there, which you can see right there. So once you remove those, your torque converter will quite literally fall off. So make sure you've got it supported or you're not under it. Once that's off, and again, I'll show you all of this. Once you have those 3 bolts off and your torque converter's off, the next thing you're gonna do is get a 19 millimeter on an impact. It's gonna make your life a lot easier. And then there's going to be, I believe, 8 19 millimeter bolts holding your starter flex plate on. We're gonna remove those, and then we're gonna start with the reinstallation, the fun part. Okay, so we are complete with the last step, and I'll just give you some visuals here. The torque converter is now off. These are the 3 bolts that you have to remove, and they are 17s, not 18s, my apologies. So, I screw into there. As you can see, you've got 1, 2, 3, and they are accessible from the back of the flex plate, so you'll be coming at them from this direction. You can see the holes right here that you can see through where it bolts to it. So, now that that's done, what the next thing you're going to do, like I said, is removal of the flex plate, which is right here. This is the flex plate. You've got 8 19 millimeter bolts. That's standard for BMW. It's 19 millimeters. So any car you do that's a BMW most likely is going to have 19 millimeter bolts attaching the flex plate or flywheel to the crank. This is what it looks like behind it. You got your pressure spacer or whatever you want to call it, and then your flex plate. Once all that's removed, this is what your engine's going to look like. So, as you can tell, I removed that lower section of the pan. This is what that looks like. 4 bolts, really easy, came right off. And when you're reinstalling, do not forget to put your pilot bearing in. I've seen 5-speed swaps come in from other people, and they can't figure out why their trans is rattling or why their transmissions are exploding or all kinds of problems. Pilot bearing, and we can list the part number for that in the description of the video. It's very easy on this one. That's what you're looking for. There's your pilot bearing. This is a factory E30 bearing. That's what we're going to be using. The one in the donor car was pretty much brand new, and I used the old-fashioned grease trick to get it out. So we're going to reuse it. Probably not the best practice, especially since they're like 10 bucks. So just go get a new one and slap it in there. And also, I'm sure I'll harp on this again, and everyone at the shop is going to make fun of me who hears me say this, but when you are installing the bearing, make very sure that you do not pound on any surface other than this outer race right here. If you hit that, you can damage the bearing. If you're hitting the soft dust cover, you can damage the bearing. And it is very important that you get it reseated into the crankshaft a good distance. You don't want it to be flush with the crankshaft. It needs to be reseated about an 1/8 inch or so. And I'm sure there's some specs online about that, about exactly how far it's supposed to be, but a good rule of thumb is make sure it's at least a 1/4 inch in there before you put your transmission on. I have seen it cause problems with transmissions going into gear, making noise, sounding like the throttle bearing is going out. So anyway, long story short, pound on the outer race, make sure it's countersunk in at least 1/8 of an inch, and you shouldn't have a problem. So next thing we're gonna do is removing the rest of the automatic transmission associated components from inside the cab. So we're gonna be removing the automatic shifter linkage. We're gonna be removing all of the solenoids and all the stuff in the center console, removing the pedals, and opening up the block-off plates for all the lines that need to be run. So let's go up top. Okay, so the next step is to remove the pedals. I've already done this. These are actually the pedals out of the donor car, but regardless, it's a good visual. So, depending on what year your E30 is, you're either gonna have a plug like this, or you're gonna have one plug that goes on top of it. Either way, your brake pedal sensor needs to be disconnected. So go ahead and pull that towards you. That's removed. And then get this pedal out of the way so you can see. Your next step is there is a pin that goes right through here. This. That pin looks like this. So it's going to be oriented like this. It's going to be through there. And then there's going to be a bracket that it also goes through. But you want to pry this paint marked surface outwards towards the driver's side of the car, and then pull the entire pin towards you. So once you do that, it's going to look like this. This is the clip. So you've got a visual of it. So once that's off, your pin's just going to be chilling in there kind of like this. and this spring is going to be hooked to it. Next thing you want to do, disconnect the spring, get it off the pin, pull the pin out entirely. Okay, so once you get that done, the next step is removing the 4 nuts that come through here. These are attached to your brake booster, so you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. They're 13 millimeters, and when you do that, it helps for pedal removal. If you go in the engine compartment and push the brake booster towards the front of the car, it will reduce the amount of stud that needs to be cleared on these in order to get the pedals out. Once you've got that done, if you have an early model car, this applies to non-airbag cars only. So if you've got a 1990 or 1991, or if you're in Europe, 92 or 93, you are not going to have to worry about these. Airbag cars do not have these bolts. You are going to leave this surface in the car, and what you're going to do, rather than pull these 2 nuts off right here, which your donor car may or may not have them, but if it's an early model car before 1990, there's 2 more 13 millimeters mounted vertically to the steering column right there. But if it's an airbag car, what you're going to do, which our car is an airbag car, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this nut right here and then slide this entire assembly right here towards the driver's side. It'll come out, and then this brake pedal will be free. And then we're going to do the same thing on the automatic car and move everything over into this bracket system that's currently in the automatic car. These brackets are the same. You can swap them between cars, or I'm sorry, you can leave them in the cars and swap the pedal assemblies over. You do need to move the brake pedal over. The automatic pedal is significantly larger, and if you leave it, it comes to about right here. So when you go to clutch, you're going to accidentally hit your brakes too. It's very dangerous. So don't do that. Remove both pedals, swap both pedals. If you're ghetto and you only buy this piece, you can cut your brake pedal, but I don't recommend that. Just go buy the pedals. They're cheap, they're all over eBay. You can find them. So once you get that done, if you're removing the pedals from the manual car, the next thing you're going to want to do is there's 2 10 millimeter bolts that go through here and here, bolted to the car. So if your pedals are in there like this, you cannot see the heads of the bolts. You will need to go get the clutch pedal out of the way. So, you know, fold it away or do whatever you got to do. Press it in and remove the 2 bolts that go in there. So this will look like that. You'll remove those 2, and then you'll be able to pull that up and out and away from the firewall. Removing the automatic shifter. All right, so your car is an automatic. When it comes to the factory, it's going to look something like this. Now, obviously, the center console has been removed from this car. Well, pretty much everything's been removed from this car. So it's pretty easy for you guys to see. So what you're going to do, the very first thing is you're going to remove the automatic shifter handle. And the way to do that is to leave it in, I think it's drive. Makes it pretty easy, so it's nice and vertical. Do not put your face in this area. You will punch yourself in the face. Ask me why I know. But what you're going to do is you need to pull up really hard. I mean really hard, because these things have usually never been removed. The handle will pop off and go up. That will allow you to then remove the plastic surround from the shifter. So that's just snaps. You pop it up, remove that, and then you'll have access to 1 10 millimeter nut and 2 10 millimeter bolts. So 1, 2, 3. Once that's done, as long as you're disconnected on the shifter side, mechanically it's disconnected. However, you're going to need to remove this plug. So from the factory, it looks like this, and there is a female side that comes in, and it's this clip right here. And this is also going to be where we're going to wiring after the conversion is done to allow the car to start. So now that that's all out, and we got the automatic pedals out, and we got the automatic shifter out, at this point we're actually ready to start installing all the manual components. So the first thing we're going to do is get the clutch pedals in, all the lines run, and the master and slave cylinders all ready to go. That's the first step. So we're going to come back as soon as that's done. Okay, so just a quick comparison for brake pedal size. This is why you need to swap your brake pedal out. So imagine this was right here. That doesn't really look like it'll work. Oh no, I can't hit the clutch. Oh no, my car's stopping. Ah! Yeah, it doesn't work. So anyway, you got to change that out. Throw this in the garbage and install these boys. That's what we're doing right now. Ready, brake. At this point, I'm removing, well, have already removed the pedals from the other pedal bracket, since we found out that this is a 1990 or 91. It's an airbag car regardless. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pedals out of the automatic pedal box so I don't have to remove the whole dang thing. Once we get that done, we are going to then start running the master and slave cylinder lines and hooking all of the hydraulics up. Once we get the hydraulics on, then we will start installing the transmission and all of the associated components. But make sure that the first thing that you want to do is install the pedals and all the lines. If you install the transmission first, take my word for it, it is a gigantic pain in the ass to get those lines run up and through the firewall and connect to your slave cylinder, or I'm sorry, your master cylinder. So let's do that right now, and I will try to point out any little tips or tricks that I have and show you guys where everything goes and what to do. Let's do it. 3-pedal setup is in, and the creepy guy's behind me again. Anyway, come on, follow me, YouTube. Check it out. Ignore the wiring, because the wiring is terrible. So, as you can tell, it now has 3 pedals. So, the next thing we're going to do is raise the car up. So, cue raising car thing. Okay, so, next thing we are going to do is we're going to take this little fella. And so, this is the setup that we pulled off of the donor car. You can do this 2 ways. You can leave it connected and try to feed it up there. Sometimes that's easier. Or you can do it one at a time. Or what I like to do is feed this end, so the hooked end right there with the 90, that goes onto your master cylinder, and then you disconnect this side. So that's going to go into the end of your master cylinder, and then you're going to feed this through the firewall and hook it towards the passenger side. And it's going to pop out right here. So it goes in this bracket. And there's also usually a spring clip on here that keeps the nuts from backing out, but the donor car didn't have it, so unfortunately this car is not going to have it. But it's not super necessary. I mean, use it, guys. Go buy it. If you don't have it, put it on. Don't be like me. Okay, so now we're going to drop the car down. Now that you can see where it's going, and we will feed it into the hole where it goes. Here we go. Master cylinder installation. Here's how this works. When it's installed in the car, it's oriented like this. This is going to go through a hole right above, and it's going to feed into your brake reservoir, which actually, even in the automatic cars, has a provision for your clutch. All you have to do is cut it. I'll show you that here in a second. We want it to be right about there, because it needs to go down and towards the passenger side. So if you look at it like this, it's going to be oriented like that. That goes like that when it's installed. So this should be about right. I'm not going to crank it. I will do that and scratch the crap out of my hands, but then at least we'll be able to see the correct angle. So, moving along. All right, so now we're going to feed the line in, and I'm going to correct what I said earlier about tightening it. It looks like it's going to make our life a little easier if we leave it loose so it can kind of find its way over there. Come on, sucker. All right, so I guess we'll start with that, and then this line goes through the upper hole. So now, on a normal E30, you're going to have, well, on an automatic E30, you will have these holes blocked off. You're going to have to punch the blanking holes out of them. This one, for some reason or another, did not have them in there. So I did not have to do that. But you guys, in place of that hole right there where this line is going through, and the one right above it, right there, if you can see, those 2 holes are going to be covered on your cars at home. This one was not, but that upper hole right there is where you feed this clutch fluid feed line through. Okay, so here's the line I just fed through. You can see it right there. It's blue. It's going to be kind of hard to see. There it is. Perfect. So it's fed through, and the easiest way to do this is just to kind of stick the first 2 or 3 inches in, no pun intended, and then get some pliers, some long needle nose pliers, or even just regular ones look like they're going to be long enough, and grab it and pull it up through. And then what you're going to do when it's time, once you have all the hydraulic lines connected, you're going to come right here. This is your clutch feed nipple. So all you need to do is cut it off about 1/8 of an inch back from where this flat tab stops. So if you can see the line right there on the video, that's about where you need to cut it. So once your slave cylinder is connected and all the lines are tight, then you will cut that and stick your feed line on. And you can leave your bleed screw open on your slave cylinder, and then that way it'll kind of act as a gravity bleed, and it might help you out a little bit later as you're finishing the swap. Just make sure you remember to close it before you go stepping on the pedal. So let's get the rest of the stuff on, and I'll show you what else you need to do. Okay, so as you can see, the pedals are in. The line to the the bolt to the master cylinder is bolted to the pedal. Okay, so right there, that's the bolt into the master cylinder. As you can see, it comes from the passenger side and goes towards the driver's side. And again, we're talking about left-hand drive. Next thing we want to take a look at is the hole that the master cylinder is pointed through. So it is the bottommost hole. Perfect. And then additionally, I also have the brake pedal hooked up to the brake booster. Okay, so now that the pedals are in, the master cylinder's on, and the first hard line to the clutch is run, the next thing we're gonna do is hook up the slave cylinder. You wanna make sure that the compression fitting on this joint is nice and clean. So what I'm gonna do is just spray it off, get all the schmutz out of there, screw that sucker in. Okay, all right, so when your slave cylinder is installed, it's going to look like this. Right there on the transmission, so you want to kind of try to orient it appropriately. And again, all of your clutch line nuts are going to be 11 millimeters. So now your hydraulic system is completely connected, and once those lines are tight, which I'm going to do right now, then we're going to hook up the fill line. So that's next. So side cutters, dikes, whatever you UK people call them, you need these. Next step. So what we're going to do is cut this nipple right here. And you want to cut it just enough to get the fluid flowing at a good rate. So I'm going to cut it about right there. Bam. Stick that on there as fast as you can. Preferably if you're not holding lights and cameras and stuff. All right. Now, our hydraulic system is complete. All lines are tight. There's some fluid in it. I'm going to crack the bleeder nipple, so as we're doing the rest of the job, the fluid can kind of slowly go into the hydraulic system, and it's going to be less work and less bleeding for me. So that's cool. Next step, pilot bearing installation, flywheel installation, clutch disc installation, pressure plate installation, transmission on, slave cylinder on, drive shaft on. Let's do this.